So last reminder for everyone, if you need a certificate of attendance, please message me. For those who just joined us, cameras off, mic off, and we'll go ahead and introduce our last and final presenter for today. We've had a great day. I feel very educated now and inspired. So I'm sure that's going to continue with Jerome, who's our last presenter here. Jerome's going to present to us on a chronological exploration of the origins of spatial theory. So a little bit about Jerome. He has an MFA in interior design from Miami International University of Art and Design. He's working towards his doctorate in leadership and development at Converse University, where he continues to teach as a tenure track as an assistant professor. Before that, he managed an independent design firm for 18 years. Following extensive work in interior design and with overarching it's been a long day, overarching awareness and research towards establishing a foundational theory of interior design. Jerome focuses his attention on the philosophy of raising student understanding of spatial theory as a means to sustain student performance over the life of their careers. And with that, Jerome, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
How is everybody? So I guess I have to share my screen, is that correct?
Yes, please. And if you need, I do have your presentation.
I think it's this one here I have here. There, can we see it?
Yes, I can see it. It's not in full screen yet.
Okay, maybe that's a problem. Let's see. Oh, okay, right. It's not in full screen yet. It's in full screen now.
Yep, it's on the questions page.
And we're going back to the beginning. Sorry. We got it there now, the path, right? Okay. I'm sorry about that, but we're there. Okay. Logical exploration of the origin of spatial theory. Now, over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to identify multiple paths as part of a process of understanding spatial theory. We're going to look at the historical path, the contemporary path, and then we're going to go looking back and exploring the mythological path. And I know that we're going to have to move quickly, so we have to, I guess, get started now. All right, so how do we begin to understand spatial theory? Making it difficult to grasp. It's heavily tied to human nature. We must revert to an abstract concept in order to describe it. So what can we do to make this easier to understand? Well, the answer that I've come up with is that there's no real easy way to understand it. However, if we can interpret it as a journey or an experiential journey that leads us down a singular path toward because it references the idea of experiencing multiple pathways simultaneously. It's a concept that we as human beings typically use for understanding new things. So I began with an overarching concept of the built environment because what we're trying to understand is spatial theory as it relates to constructing new environments. The one thing for Alexander, Georges Bataille, and Gaston Bachelard, because in their writings they are essentially saying the same thing. Alexander's concept of environment is the infusion of a profound sense of being alive, while Bataille's concept of spatial environments are about us as people needing the ability to aimlessly wander within our own being. Environments essentially teeming with life. So to this point, I used Jim Powell's book titled Deconstruction for Beginners. It's a postmodern graphic-like novel that essentially explains Derrida's model for to the use of speech and words. So what this model is, yes, ma'am?
Just a heads up, your audio is cutting in and out for us. Like it'll be really clear sometimes, then it'll stop for like 2 seconds, then it'll come back in.
Wow. I'm trying there. Okay. Is that a little better?
I'll let you know if it happens again.
Okay. So I'm going to try to keep this a little closer to myself here. So what this model explains is that in order to understand new concepts along a pathway, I guess, shown here.
We just lost it again.
I'm sorry.
Jerome, sorry, I'm not sure what's going on.
Could be using a different process here. Hold on. Maybe, do you think the sound volume is up there better?
You
No,
can try that.
I just turned up the,
Nope, we just lost you again.
okay, so maybe it is the internet process. Okay, so what do you think we can do to make this better?
I don't know if it's something where you're occasionally blocking your mic or not speaking directly into the mic. We've had that happen on one of the presentations.
Okay, so what I'm gonna
Oh,
do.
and Dan Beard says it's not the volume. He says your mic is disconnecting.
Have it plugged in. My mic is disconnecting. Is that better?
I can hear you now.
Can?
I can, yes.
Okay, maybe it was that it wasn't quite all the way in, plugged in. Maybe that's better. Is that correct?
I'll let you know if it happens again.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thanks for your patience.
We need to develop points of reference that surround the concept that then travel along the pathways from the point to one point to another to arrive at a place in our mind that we grasp the nature of what we're trying to understand. And that's these points that encircle the meaning that we're trying to achieve. In this case, as we begin the process of understanding spatial theory, we look to history and the concepts of historical view of spatial theory in terms of how it began, how it evolved, and where we are now. History serves as a path of understanding and allows us to extract valuable information at given points of time. I initially took this information from Alberto Perez Gomez, Stephen Hall, and Giuliani Palazmi in their book, Questions of Perception. In my thesis, I go through by conducting a comparative analysis study, and this is what I've discovered. The first rational understanding of the beginning understanding of design theory originates from Plato, with meaning by characterizing it with the essence of being, becoming, and change as a form of understanding. As expected, it was not well understood at the time. Later, Aristotle, a contemporary of Plato, believed that although Plato's core was accurate interpretation, he felt that it wasn't relevant to the people and if they weren't able to comprehend it. So he infused it with new meaning. He infused it with mimesis, catharsis, and distancing. These, of course, are theoretical terminologies. These specifically refer to the physical attributes that emerged out of the tragedies and comedies of ancient Greek not understood. We were in the BC. Around the turn of the first millennium. What he did was synthesize all that had come before, including the writings of Plato, Aristotle, and others. He essentially codified all information he gathered through the analysis of historical content into a singular set of architectural standards based on human proportions and scale. These are in the physical manifestations of space, largely derived from theoretical concepts. Are still standing today. However, when we hit the medieval period or the Dark Ages, Western culture was plagued with the strife of war and disease. The essence of classical period luminous cora had begun to recede into everyday activities of human existence. The doctrine of religion was elevated to the point at which it dominated all aspects of human existence, and life became more about the afterlife rather than the real world, life in the real world. So the language of questioning space became very different. The Church of Western culture essentially became the building barons of Western society, but without the knowledge or skill to adequately construct environments, as most of that knowledge had been lost or forgotten over time. What we see here is the medieval buildings still in existence today. Not until the High Gothic period or the late medieval period did we see Cora begin to reassert itself. By this time, the church had become more adept in constructing and consequently building. In the Milan Cathedral, we see here built in the early 14th century, we get a sense of scale re-emerging through exterior facades, the illusion of multiple levels happening with only one story, a single story. It is until the Renaissance period that everything changes. With new thinkers and artisans that share the same belief in a natural philosophy as opposed to a theological one, we begin to see Cora fully reemerge, but not in the same way it once existed. In its dormant state, a type of evolution had taken hold, and what once was viewed as a single historical concept, viewpoints. Cora had essentially split into two diametrically opposing concepts: human experience and mental concept, tethered by the transcendent nature of human existence. Slides evaporated to the reality of the space based on human condition. In the images of Scuola Grandi de San Marcos, we see a strong sense of scale and proportion that are in reality carried throughout the entire structure, maintaining a comprehensive focus on human interactions. As a result of this new model for Cora, a new model for Cora emerged as a contemporary concept of spatial theory with an historical nature of human experience remaining fully intact, with the historical nature of human experience remaining fully intact. A simplistic model that I show here illustrates the philosophy of human experience, represented as two metaphorical vanishing points, tethered by the horizon line of the plane of human in a three-dimensional space to contemporary space, noting that we are in this era beyond historical space, passing over that 1400 AD period where we get into the Renaissance and contemporary space. So as part of the journey, I've attempted to communicate the historical path of spatial theory, noting that the first rational understanding of human experience identified by Plato and further codified by philosophers and theorists down the line until we hit the point of where we are now in the evolutionary process. This is of course one path that is identified along this process of Derrida's model of understanding, and in case of understanding, spatial theory, in this case, spatial theory. The next path that we're going to quickly explore the deconstruction of spatial theory. This is a lot of my work that I've done in the past, and so I've kind of into the presentation as part like the others you see. The components of spatial theory are highly theoretical and of course consume a lot of time to explain. Interior designers will get the sense of how spatial theory works in the world today. In the understanding of spatial theory, or how we create contemporary space, I've engaged in the deconstructive process where I've adapted Bernard Shumi's theoretical framework for the pyramid and the labyrinth. And as you can see here, the labyrinth represents an experiential through the human body, while the pyramid represents conceptual space reflected through the philosophy of the two worlds. I have communicated how this works. I've communicated how this actually works in previous slides. It suffices to say that these two concepts are fully independent but remain mutually exclusive, and when they come together, new space emerges. As part of the deconstructive process, gathering, building, and boundaries are revealed as inherent spatial principles that are common, held a distinct structural pattern, allowing pathways to merge at every level, permitting diffusion of information to flow between and in between every aspect of the pyramid and the labyrinth, as it clearly seen in these graphic slides. So we see that the information flows down to the plane of human existence where truth actually exists. To more clearly understand this individual aspects and attempted to understand how they fit together. So I begin with the labyrinth. As part of this research, it was revealed that the labyrinth itself originated out of two distinct concepts: materiality, or the physical world around us, and derived from Georges Vital, to understand the space around us, revealing the tactile and haptic sensations of the human body. What this tells us is to engage in truly meaningful experiences, that we must allow our bodies to draw upon haptic and musculoskeletal systems to fully interact with the physical world around us, sort of a mindful process that we have to be aware of. In this model you see here, each component fits into a symbolic building block where the components of materiality, right, are tied to the components of human sensorial effect. So if we were to lay one object over the other object, we would end up with Shumi's experience of space. The third aspect of the symbolic building block, which we haven't actually mentioned yet, right, is critical to the component of the process, but maintains an independent quality and is the only there's both the pyramid and the labyrinth into a singular spatial understanding and the manifestation of real space. Through this process, all information that has been gathered within the labyrinth is essentially funneled down via a system of pathways, allowing for an infusion of information in these spatial principles. This is a spatial experience that's capable of communicating with the pyramid in a more meaningful way. The pyramid, because it's a conceptual two-dimensional process, is composed of a three-layered tiered system, which each level represents the principles of gathering, building, and boundaries respectively. We have 3 levels actually that we're actually discussing. The first level, or the gathering aspect of the pyramid, is constructed out of the risings of Bachelor, the dematerialization of objects into concepts. As part of this understanding, meaningful objects serve as a proliferation of concepts each other, forming a type of dialectic of opposing thought. To the next level of opposing points of view. This level of the pyramid has been characterized by Roland Barthes' work as death of the author. What this essentially says is that when we engage in a creative process utilizing a linguistic approach, we must abandon all preconceived notions of how the ending is going to emerge. The process of developing that metaphorical concept capable of communicating with a singular spatial experience, utilizing a creative process view. In design, this would mean researching various concepts to the point at which we're able to find a commonality that exists across all concepts. It is at this point that a light bulb goes off in our minds, and then we now come to the realization that what is called the metaphorical truth, or a kind of truth that is never realized until it reveals itself. In this aspect, there are no authors. There's only a facilitator who guides the process to where the metaphysical truth can now, of course, to the main graphic that shows how this works and how the flow of information travels down and up the pyramid to arrive at the point of truth through correspondence to where the melding of these ideas are allowed to manifest real space. So all of this information comes to the spatial experience, where all of this information flows up to the conceptual image. Then they begin to correspond with each other, and as they correspond, real space actually emerges. Okay, so we've once again added a new path to Derrida's model of understanding, which our next final path is the mythological path, and this is something new for me. Well, it's something that I've researched in the past, but I've not really fully explored it, but I had this desire to explore it, so I went back and took a look at it to see how I could integrate it into this process, because I think it's a fascinating fascinating concept that looks back. It's kind of like a movie. We're watching the movie, we're watching what comes next, and then we go back to the origins of it. So that is sort of that idea. The design. Okay, so the next is our final path, the mythological path, and the path that is designed to verify the origins of spatial theory. It is primarily the lens of a mythological age. I also have to say that, of course, it's not fully formed, but I'm going to give you what I have, and I'm sure I'm almost positive you'll be able to grasp the nature of what I'm talking about. Okay, in ancient times, before man was able to rationally understand how things came into being, they created allegorical tales to explain this process. This essentially gave birth to what we know and understand as the mythological age. Theseus and the Minotaur is the environment came to exist. Okay, but to grasp this concept, we first have to understand the story. And I'm assuming most of us have somewhat familiarity with the tale. So I'm only going to give a brief overview. The story goes that King Minos of Crete was gifted a magical white bull from the god. It was said to be the most beautiful of all things, and his wife and bore a child known as the human flesh became so unmanageable that the king Minos hired Daedalus to construct a labyrinth beneath the city to house the Minotaur. To maintain the Minotaur within the labyrinth, Minos instigated a lottery to feed the Minotaur the human flesh he desired. Theseus, in an effort to free the Minoan civilization from the fear of being eaten, volunteered himself as one of the selected for the opportunity to slay the beast himself. Ariadne, the daughter of Pasiphae and Minos, and in love with Theseus, offered him a ball of thread and instructed him to lay the thread along the path so that he should he slay the Minotaur and survive, he would be able to find his way back. The Minotaur and freed the Minoan civilization from the paralyzing concepts of fear, allowing them the freedom to build an environment that provided them with a safe and comfortable existence. How this relates to spatial theory and the built environment, you first need to understand the players and their symbolic reference. And this is sort of what I've come up with. The Minotaur or the beast symbolically represents the concept of fear. We know that when our bodies are experiencing fear, it paralyzes us. We're unable to function in a normal manner. In ancient times, before we lived in communities and constructed environments, we were always fearful of being attacked or eaten by wild animals. So we lived in caves and things like that nature. We didn't really build at that time. King Minos symbolically represents that wild family attempting to control and manage the symbolically represents the labyrinth itself, defined as the confusing arrangement of non-constructed components needed to rationally construct a built environment. Theseus, the hero, or the heroic rational understanding of human nature, I would venture to say, represents man himself. Ariadne, the savior, most holy, she saves man from the utter distinction by providing hope. Now, Pasiphae, the wife of Minos, is probably the most fascinating of all. She represents and the mother of fear itself. Without fear, there would be no need for hope of a better future, nor would there be need to build. So she houses these two concepts together. Ariadne's thread represents the path, that which organizes the confusing arrangements of non-constructed components within the labyrinth into a well-organized. Questions that I would have probably asked is, assuming that I've provided you with enough information on the symbolic nature of Theseus and the Minotaur, I would ask, did Theseus actually slay the Minotaur? How did he actually slay the Minotaur? And so logically, that answer would come up with that he strangled the Minotaur with the thread or the path. Okay. And the other thing is, if we look at Bataille's writing in Dennis Hollier's book Against Architecture, Bataille notes that we construct or build for the freedom of aimlessly wandering within our own being, to essentially protect ourselves from from negative outside forces. He goes as far as to say that we exist within that prison he refers to as the built-in. Experience something new, we bring that experience into our environment by opening up new space to provide for it. Thus, the built environment continually grows from within. I would say that Theseus probably brought everybody into the labyrinth rather than escaping the labyrinth himself. Okay, so I've also did some graphics sort of graphic, which says that this is the labyrinth. This is the thread or Ariadne's threads that actually ties these components together. And as you can see, the labyrinth, the pyramid and the labyrinth are essentially colliding at this point. And so it's a sort of symbolic representation that this collision is what's it creates this confusion, and then you need this thread in order to tie these components together, which provides basically this one point or this singular perspective of how things should be or how things should be created during historical space. But as time went on, both of these objects become more and more independent, more and more filled with their own. We then begin seeing something in a multiple perspective ideas, and so they're both still tied by humanity and the fact that it's humanity that is spread across time, and that it's all part of who we are as human beings. And so we're back to Derrida's model of understanding. We've added another path. We now have a third path. We're more clearly being able to understand what spatial theory is, or how it operates, or how it works. And if we continue to add, looks like. And so now I'm at the end, and I guess if anybody has any questions, please let me know. And also, any guidance, because I'm trying to create this in a little bit better, more seamless manner. I do know that there's a lot of information and that I am speaking really fast, and that trying to, being able to understand things, you have to do it at a slower pace. But there's just so much in there that I just
Thank you, Jerome. I do see that Kurt has his hand raised for a question. Kurt, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Jerome, how are you doing?
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Nice presentation. And I know we've talked about this before in the past, and this inclusion of the mythological, I think, is a really interesting development in what you're thinking about. I was especially interested in how you were talking about the idea of the idea of the Cora, and how it appeared at different points in history, and this sort of Platonic understanding of the Cora as this sort of nameless, featureless receptacle that kind of takes the impression of whatever value, meaning, and that sort of stuff that we would describe to it. And then it's through that sort of engagement between this sort of intention and meaning that the form actually begins to derive out of this sort of formless blob. And I'm wondering, what's that connection between this idea of core and mythology? Because mythology has this, is sort of ripe with meaning, right? You're talking about these Greek myths have this very sort of direct intention, and then you think about something like the maze, you get this sort of emergence of a form that's related to the mythological meaning, but now it actually has some sort of a physical form. And I'm wondering about that relationship between the idea of sort of mythological meaning, I think that's what you're talking about, and then the sort of emergence from Cora of some sort of a meaning spatial organization. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that relationship between the two?
Wow, that is really an interesting question, because what was in my mind when I was kind of creating these things, and most of it, like I sort of try to envision it, and the idea of Cora being this sort of liminal concept. I don't know, it had sort of ethereal method originally, and it just, as time went on, it got brought down into reality. But the relationship with mythology in Cora being, it's just, for what I know now, for what I understand now, is that it's a within that idea that it transitions from what is not being able to purely understand it. Maybe that's what it is, that the mythology part is sort of identifying the fact that there is something there, we just don't get it, we don't quite understand it, and that when Plato comes into to sort of a rational concept, touched on, which is really a fascinating idea. I cannot adequately tell you what I'm thinking.
That's fair enough. I think there's something quite interesting about the idea of something that's shapeless and formless like a Cora. And then with the advent of mythology, the overlay of mythology, then we begin to see the actual spatial organization. So one can't exist without the other. So mythology doesn't have formal expression until it's actually realized in, maybe spatial organization, and vice versa. Cora doesn't mean anything until you actually put some sort of a mythology on top of it. So there's an interesting relationship. And I kind of see a similarity between the pyramid and the labyrinth that you're talking about through Shumi's work, that merge. And so I think it's the two things kind of coming together there. But anyways, we could talk about this later. I just wanted to say it's a really nice addition to your thinking.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Thank you.
I think that's great.
Thanks, Jerome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jerome. Just to really quick wrap up, that's everything. We've made it through all the presentations. Jerome, thank you for being our last and final speaker, but I do want to give just a really big shout out to Kristen King for helping host the conference and running the Zoom session with me today. So thank you to Kristen, and thank you to everyone who has attended. I feel uplifted and inspired and ready to go back to reality. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. You're welcome to stay on if you have a few more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we'll wrap up.